next sitting day. Call on Government Order of the Day number 2.
Taxation, Transformation, First Phase, Simplification and Other Measures Bill, interrupted debate on second reading.
Members, when we're on the second reading of the Taxation, Transformation, First Phase, Simplification and Other Measures Bill, the next call will go to the Labour Party. I call Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and a pleasure to take a call on the Taxation, Transformation, First Simplification and Other Measures Bills. And let's start out at the beginning, that there is a problem with this bill in that the word transformation is having its loosest ever possible meaning given to it in the history of the English language, because there is very little about this piece of legislation that could be described as transformative. If one were introducing a transformative taxation bill, it would rebalance taxation between hard-working PAYE earners and those who speculate in the property market, or you'd be transforming our taxation to create New Zealand as the taxation regime that the rest of the world looks at and says that is the highest standard of ethics right there and then. No loopholes for foreign trusts. That would be transformative for the taxation system. Or a taxation bill that finally said that we will ensure that multinational companies pay their fair share of tax in New Zealand, and that hard-working wage and salary earners can be rest assured they're doing their bit, and so are the other taxpayers. That would be a transformative taxation bill, Mr Speaker. But that's not what's in front of us here today. And so this bill is utterly misnamed, and once again the government has complacently brought forward a piece of tax legislation without actually taking the time to think about what could they do right now today to help New Zealand grow a productive economy, to ensure that people pay their fair share, to ensure that people are given a fair go. That's what tax legislation should be about when it comes to this House, and unfortunately, Mr Speaker, that is not what is in front of us. What is in front of us is a series of minor amendments to a range of bills: the Income Tax Act, the Tax Administration Act, the GST Act, the KiwiSaver Act, the Child Support Act, the Student Loan Scheme Act, which we just amended a moments ago, the Gaming Duties Act and the ACC Act. Some of the changes here are linked to the Inland Revenue Department's new and improved forms of communication. And that occupied a lot of the time of the Select Committee, Mr Speaker, was discussing the way in which technology could now be used for the IRD to communicate with taxpayers. And as a general rule, Mr Speaker, those of us on the Labour Party side of the House want to see that technology used and used efficiently and effectively. And while there will be always a need for rules around that, it did, for me, become a little frustrating in the Select Committee as we got into the real nitty-gritty of electronic signatures and were they safe, and could we actually make use of email as a formal means of communication? Of course we can. And while we, as I say, we have to step our way through that appropriately, it is important. And fair dues to the IRD, that is what they brought the bill to the committee to do, was to move away from paper-based services towards more digital services, Mr Speaker. And as I say, there were references in legislation to things being sent by post, and with the risk of upsetting my former colleague, Sir Michael Cullen, not that many people are doing that any longer, and so he's worked it out. Yeah. And so therefore, the phrase "by post" has been replaced with phrases like "by writing." There's actually a this will appeal to some of my colleagues, particularly. Actually, I'm thinking of my former colleague Marianne Street here, that we debated a three-tiered approach to the way in which Inland Revenue Department seeks communications out from taxpayers, and it was 3 tiers of verbs. And we did have quite some debate in the Select Committee about the hierarchy of verbs. And I can see that Mr Speaker knows he missed out here. He missed out on this conversation. So we do have a three-tiered approach with use of verbs: ask, request or inform, apply or notify, and formally notify. So we now have a tiered approach to the way in which when IRD is asking things, they ask, they request, or they inform, apply or notify, and then formally notify. So these changes are big news Mr. Speaker, in the world of taxation, that we now have some clearer and perhaps more modern language that is involved in that. As I said earlier, electronic signatures were a particular topic of debate, and we have provided now for documents such as tax returns to be filed under an electronic signature. So easy for, I don't know, busy people like the Prime Minister. When the Prime Minister's doing a tax return, the Prime Minister could apply an electronic signature to that. And I think on this side of the House, we'd be more than happy to take his tax returns with an electronic signature, you know, because we're not fussy, Mr. Speaker, about the form in which the Prime Minister's tax returns find their way into the public arena. But if he wants to be transparent, if he wants to be open to this, then we would be more than happy to see an electronic signature-based return, and that's now possible under this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. I do want to spend a couple of minutes talking about an issue that I didn't think would take the Select Committee very much time, but amazingly enough did. And that's the question of secrecy in a co-location environment. Inland Revenue is now co-located in a number of centres in New Zealand with other government agencies, and there's all kinds of efficiencies for the consumers, for citizens to be able to visit and work with government agencies when they're together. We had a long discussion about whether there were adequate secrecy provisions in place for both Inland Revenue employees and employees of other government agencies who were working in a co-located environment. And in the end, Mr. Speaker, I was sounding a little bit cynical when I introduced this part of my speech, but actually this is a serious matter. Inland Revenue deals with the sensitive information of all New Zealand taxpayers, and in a co-located environment it is possible someone takes something to the photocopier, they put it on the photocopier, they get interrupted, something happens, they leave a page behind, and under the secrecy requirements that are currently on Inland Revenue staff, if another Inland Revenue staff member were to walk up and pick up the piece of paper, then they would be covered by the same rules. If you then look into a co-located environment, you might have, as an example, a staff member from Ministry of Social Development or ACC or somebody like that who's co-located, not governed by the same secrecy provisions as the Inland Revenue Department members. So we had a long discussion in the committee about how we would deal with this. In the end, we essentially upped the requirements on Inland Revenue staff to be aware of their own secrecy provisions, and that they have to have a higher duty of care, essentially, when they're working in that co-located environment. And there are some amendments that have been made by the committee to enable that. Mr. Speaker, there was some good discussions, and this is a good element of the bill, around how we can help support employees who get the possibility of share purchasing or within the firms that they work for. The benefits to employees under share purchase agreements have not always been clear to people, have not always been easily identified, and as part of an IRD discussion document or discussion process on this, the amendments in the bill allow the treatment of the amount of benefit from a share purchase agreement as extra pay, allow employers to choose to withhold tax on the value, and would require the employer, whether choosing to withhold or not, to disclose the value received via a monthly schedule. So just making more transparent and more open the way in which employee share schemes operate. They are now a much more common part of people's remuneration, and it's important for the IRD's processes and policies to keep up with that. More broadly, Mr. Chair, there was a range of changes around information sharing, which continues to be a very important part of what the IRD does. Also around KiwiSaver, a series of changes there to ensure that the rules are clear for everyone. One that again attracted a lot of attention is around minors, that's minors with an O, Mr. Chair, not minors with an E, who join KiwiSaver when they're signed up by their parents, and perhaps they've been incorrectly enrolled in a scheme. They have up until their 19th birthday to opt out. Members who choose to opt out would receive their employee contributions, but not their member tax credits, kickstart or employers' compulsory contributions. We did ask officials whether this was a major problem and that there were armies of young people being signed up to KiwiSaver unwillingly and then desperate to get themselves out. It's not, but obviously where that situation exists and people when they turn 18 want to remove themselves from KiwiSaver, we hope that they don't, but should they choose to, that provision's put in place. So, Mr Speaker, it is a bill that completely fails its own title. It's not transformative at all. It is perhaps, could have just been called the Taxation Other Measures Bill, and you would be accurate. But what really, I think, events of the last couple of weeks have highlighted on this side of the House is that legislation like this is missing the point when it comes to taxation. We need a tax system in New Zealand that the average working person can be confident in, that when they make their contributions and do their fair share, they know that others are doing the same. We don't have that in New Zealand at the moment. We have a system where large multinational companies are not paying their
Sorry
taxes,
to interrupt
and
the
we
member,
need to
but
do
his
better
time
than that.
expired some time ago.
Mr